Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those of you not in this time zone. Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all of the colleagues that are watching, tuning in from our operations throughout the globe. As you know, this is the annual beginning of the year address by the High Commissioner, so I'm not going to speak too long, but you'll notice we have a very active pigeonhole engagement going on, and particularly for those colleagues that are joining us from other operations, please continue to vote while you're listening to the High Commissioner, who will speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions. Thanks very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Kelly, and good day, everybody. That's the most neutral formula for all those that are listening or watching from other places. And Happy New Year, with a little bit of delay. The last town hall meeting that we had was last July, quite a while ago. Just as a starting point, I think it is important, inevitable to say that if we look at the world in which we operate, the big global trends have not really changed in the past few months. If anything, and looking at the trends that are of relevance to our work, there's been further deterioration. One should be honest. We see the growth, the constant growth of what we call inward-looking trends, especially on the part of states, of governments, into a form of modern nationalism. Look at what's happening in Europe around Brexit, in the Americas in different ways, in parts of Asia. And increasingly we see, as you know very well, better than me in fact, we see refugees, migrants, people on the move used, utilized politically, manipulated. And because more and more frequently people move in mixed flows, in what we call mixed flows, the response to this manipulation becomes more complicated, and the manipulation itself becomes easier. And all around, more at the geopolitical level, we see a world that is more and more multipolar, different from the bipolar world of 30 years ago, or even the more unipolar world that we saw in the 90s and in the last decade, a multipolar world in which the balances of power are more and more complicated and unpredictable. The general discourse in international politics seems to be, if you analyze just the news, much more about conflict than it is about solutions. This, of course, makes making peace, which is so vital for our work and for millions of people, billions of people, making peace more difficult. But also it makes it more difficult to address the global challenges of climate, of population movement, of poverty, challenges that require unity on the part of a very divided world. And of course, it makes solutions to the problems of forced displacement harder for us and for those who deal with them. So it is in this context that today I would like to focus, as you will expect, in the transformation that we have been speaking about for some time, that I have mentioned without elaborating too much in previous town halls. And I use this word, transformation, very deliberately, because the word transformation is deeper, is more significant, is more comprehensive also than simply the world change, and it is also somehow more ambitious, as we should be. Let me preface by saying that I really believe that UNHCR continues to be, as it has been for a long time, a strong organization and a respected organization. The Secretary General, in his first meeting with his senior management, mentioned a few pluses, a few positives from 2018, and among those positives, he did mention the adoption by the General Assembly of a global compact on refugees. And I believe that, and although I am very grateful to Volker and to all of you who have contributed to that success, which you know about, I believe that one of the elements of that success was the fact that the process to develop that compact was largely carried out by UNHCR in close contact with member states, and that the credibility of UNHCR accounted for a great deal of the capacity of that compact to be understood, to be embraced, and to be adopted. So of that and of many other successes, of many other protection successes, of many other instances in which we save lives, we provide support, we find solutions, of this we should be very proud. The fact that for a third year in a row, I only judging of my time as High Commissioner, we did not get all our programs funded, but we got a reasonably good level of funding. The fact that at the pledging conference last December, we got the highest ever, I think, highest ever level of initial pledges to our programs for the next year, for this year, are good indications of trust on the part of one of our constituencies, the donors. And I think that it is recognized, in spite of all the rhetoric, that our mandate, our mission, is more relevant than ever. But in order to maintain this standing that we have not just acquired over the years, that we maintain, that we work hard for day in and day out, from the most remote field locations to here in Geneva, in order to maintain that standing, we must be flexible and agile, more flexible and more agile. We must be able to grasp the opportunities that may be of a different nature that come our way. We must be able to correct our course quickly when things change. And in other words, we need to be able to work better, in a better adapted way, to this unpredictable environment. And somehow, and I'm not saying that we don't do it already, but we need to do it again with renewed energy. We need to refocus our attention. You know, I talk about UNHCR in so many fora, often at very senior levels, if they're kind enough to listen to me, often at the level of heads of state, of big opinion makers. And I can tell you, as you know very well, but I can tell you from my perspective, our credibility is strongest when we talk about what we do in the field next to the people that we work with and for. That's where our credibility is the most evident. When we talk about the people, their daily problems. You know, I'll give you one example, this huge debate over Central Mediterranean population flows. It is when we, my colleagues and I, speak about our work in Libya, for example, that people pay attention, because there's not many others working there among those risks. So that type of work is the most important. But you know that, except that we need to make a conscious effort to refocus on that level. And to do this, to help this, we need to put resources and decision-making closer to that point of delivery. That will make us even more credible, or will strengthen our credibility, and also, by the way, not unimportant, will make us more effective. And transformation, the transformation that I would like to lead is based on this: to trust or to empower in a trustworthy mode representatives and other field people and their teams, so that they can take decisions faster and better. They can build the alliances that we desperately need to do our work, which often are at the field level. I want them to be empowered in a trustworthy manner so that they can use all the opportunities that the approach opened up by the Global Compact, by the comprehensive refugee response framework that we are already implementing in 15 countries, that all these new avenues are offering to us. I want them to be empowered and strengthened so that they can participate in full autonomy as a UN agency with a strong mandate in UN efforts to pursue the Sustainable Development Goals. And they can participate equally from the point of view of UNHCR, but as full participants in efforts led by the Secretary General to reform the United Nations. And to do this, representatives and their team need to be backed by regional entities, we call them bureaus, that are closer to them and that are better organized to provide that support, and here by a headquarters that is leaner, more clearly supportive, less cumbersome to the field, and more able to help the field achieve its goal. That's why we're focusing now, and this is not the only aspect, but there is focus now, and legitimately so, because we're entering into implementation. There is focus on regionalization and decentralization. There's been huge consultation around this crucial aspect of transformation. I read already in the Pigeonhole that that management has not thought through this phase enough. Now, I would like to push back on this. It is not true that we have not thought through, but it is certainly true that not everything is yet clear, because it's a process that gets shared, gets communicated as it unfolds, and a lot of it is unfolding as we speak. And I understand, as I said to you in the past, that there is some frustration about not having the full picture. Well, nobody has the full picture, but the picture is getting fuller in every discussion that we have. But one thing I can assure you is that there's been a lot of consultation, a lot of analysis, and a lot of reflection. This culminated last week in a retreat that I called for 2 days with the entire senior management committee, including the directors, all the directors that I have recently appointed or reappointed to be the leaders of the 7 regional bureaus. And we had very good discussions, and a number of decisions or preliminary decisions were made. This morning I issue a broadcast to all staff that attempts to explain those decisions. I was told, I don't know if it is in the pigeonhole or not, but I was told that it was too long, this broadcast. But I can assure you that if the broadcast was 2 pages, the pigeonhole would have said that it was too short and didn't have enough details. So please bear with us. I know it's a lot of reading, but I, who am always asking colleagues to be short in the communication to staff because people don't have time, this time I said we need to be detailed. It's important that people, to the extent that we can, received clarity. Get clarity about some aspects of this process. Not the ones that we still have to implement, but the others. So bear with us and forgive me. I take responsibility for the length and detail of that broadcast, but I would strongly invite those of you who haven't to read it, because I won't go through all of it now. I will get only to the highlights, but there you have a lot more details. Now, it will be very challenging. I have no doubts about that, because now we really enter into the implementation period, and as I said before, it's important that we keep our seatbelt fastened because there will be turbulence. Change is always, transformation is always contains an element of turbulence, but I can assure you, and I speak for both of us and for the SET and for the Senior Management Committee, that we're certainly committed to conduct this whole exercise through the end with transparency and with the welfare of colleagues in mind, and in the full spirit of consultation and communication. On the 13th of February, and I'm not trying to deflect anything here, the Deputy High Commissioner will lead an open forum as she did just a few weeks ago, and we will make this a regular part of the exercise, an open forum where ideas can be exchanged. Now, a few elements of the decisions that I made after the retreat, in 3 areas in particular. First, in the redesign of the bureaus. Let's bear in mind that it's the bureaus that need redesign, but the objective is really strengthening the country offices. So the redesign has to be carried out with that objective in mind. We don't want to simply, some of our directors, of our new directors, are, as you all know, eminent representatives in important countries, and they all flagged this important point. They said, country representatives don't want headquarters to just come closer to them, because then it just compounds the problem. So we don't want to create 7 little headquarters, multiplying the problems that may have occurred with headquarters before. So we need to make them supportive structures to the field offices, to the country offices. In any case, a core bureau design, which we will be sharing, has been essentially developed and endorsed, with an important caveat that there is no one size that fits all. Each of the 7 regions, you know about the regions, is profoundly different, and so will require an adaptation to the core design according to their needs, but there needs to be a certain coherence, and certain essential functions are deemed indispensable in each of the 7 bureaus. Now, instead of having a geographical focus, like was the case in the traditional bureau, we redesigned the bureaus along 4 pillars. In short, 1 dedicated to strategic planning, strategic partnerships, 1 dedicated to the support to operations, 1 dedicated to external engagement in all its forms, and 1 dedicated to protection. Like I said, this structure, we want to keep these areas of focus, but the structure can be adapted to the regional context. And the bureaus have already started working in translating this context, this design, into a concrete structures with post. Since this will have to happen this year, the core structure will have to happen in 2019, it is the budget committee that will have to make a decision based on the proposals of the Bureau. And this will happen as soon as possible, hopefully towards the end of February, so that we can advertise all the new positions by the month of March. And my ambition would be that the Bureau directors and the core staff of the new Bureau is in place by the last quarter of 2019. Of course, beyond these core positions, there will be what I could call non-core functions, non-core positions that will also be needed, both at the country level and preferably at the country level, but also, of course, sometimes especially in bureaus with many small operations at the bureau level. And especially for some new features, new activities that we want to carry out, for example, the implementation of the Global Compact on Refugees or of the CRRF. This is a more complex exercise that will require discussion and planning, and the APR, the annual program review, will be focusing on the design of the non-core functions. So these functions, the positions corresponding to these functions, will be advertised later in the year for implementation in 2020. And this somehow applies also to the divisions, because there is a question, there are maybe more than one question from the pigeonhole that says, what about the divisions? Is it only the bureaus that are impacted? No, the divisions also will have to adapt. Some of their functions will be transferred to the bureau. Some of their functions currently carried out by staff, sometimes already in regional offices or sometimes here in Geneva, will also be eventually transferred to the bureaus. Others will remain with the division. But we decided to do this second transition, if you wish, gradually, because if you deplete if you take down all this capacity in one go, you risk having some gaps. So we do the decentralization. It's not ideal, but that's the only way, in two different stages. First, the bureaus decentralize, and then we work on the divisions. I hope that by mid-next year, we will have this process completed. I cannot promise that we will be punctual there, but certainly that's the aim. And in this, like I said, this year and again this year, the APR process will be quite complex and critical, and this is why we are going to constitute a special support team made of the core divisions to support the APR work. The second area in which we make decision is the more complex definition of what is the relationship between bureaus and division. Now, I have to preface this by saying that I'm a bit worried when we enter into this topic, because very often this relationship, which is so crucial for the functioning of UNHCR, is seen as a dichotomy, as two separate worlds. I think we need to remember in discussing this that we are one organization, all of us, wherever we sit, where, of course, there are different lines of authority that are exercised in different ways. Some lines of authorities are managerial, we would say, like, for example, between the bureau directors and the Assistant High Commissioner for Operations. Some are functional, like, for example, to stay with the same example, between the Bureau Directors and the Assistant High Commissioner for Protection or the Deputy High Commissioner. Both types of line are indispensable and necessary. One is not more important than the other. Both bureaus and divisions are entities that are meant to support the country offices in a complementary fashion. And therefore, besides the managerial line, which is more the line of immediate authority, we need to study how the functional lines work. And those functional lines need to work at every level. you know, the protection, like let me give you an easy-ish example. The protection staff in a country office need to be able to speak to the protection pillar in the bureau, and they need to be able to speak to the division of international protection. This is an easy example. So these lines of communication also need to be developed and made clear. There has to be a little bit more freedom, probably, in our internal communication. And what we need to encourage is something that already exists, but make it more systematic, is what specialists call what is it? Communities of interest. Communities of practice. So, you know, people dealing with protection are not a fixed structure, but they talk together to talk about policies, solutions, responses. Then, of course, the decisions have to go through the lines of authority, but a lot of those decisions can be informed, must be informed by that informal discussion in those communities. And I think that this is an interesting and important area that we need to reflect upon a little bit more, but that would like to promote. The third area of decision is in decentralizing, devolving authorities, and to develop systems that support this devolution. I have received, ahead of the retreat, 15 proposals to decentralize authority to the country office or to the bureau level, in many different areas. I don't want to give you a full list now, but for example, planning, APR, doing the APR in a more decentralized manner, fundraising, a complex one, allocating resources or reallocating resources within an envelope, managing supplies, human resources decisions, including recruitment. The list is quite long. We have examined with the SMC all these 15 proposals. I have to tell you, the overall direction, in my opinion, is correct. That was also the sense of the SMC. But of course, we need to do a little bit more work to refine these proposals and to create the supporting systems for this decision to be devolved to the field, and also the necessary safeguards and guarantees to ensure integrity of these processes. So as these things are developed and agreed and rolled out, we will keep you informed and involved. There will be more discussion. And of course, the first ones that we need to develop quickly are the delegations of authorities to the new bureaus as they go to the field, because we would like them to go out to the field empowered to make certain decisions. So some work will be there. A little bit more about that is in the broadcast. Now, as part of this delegation of authority, it is also clear, and this was the strong message that I got, especially in the first global representative meeting in 2016. We need to simplify our processes. We need to do what is called in jargon business process re-engineering in many, many areas, especially administrative areas. Many of our processes are obsolete, and many will benefit from being more, relying more on automation, even on our artificial intelligence. Many, you know, during the SMC there were very interesting discussions, many ranging from travel claims to processing resettlement. So it's not just administrative, it can also expand to other areas of our work. In some field offices, this is already happening, and we are piloting some of these new automated processes. I have asked the controller, I have asked Hans to lead the reflection in this area, which I think is extremely important. I would like UNHCR in this area of innovative processes to be at the cutting edge in the United Nations. Of course, it has to be done with great care. There is a big debate in the UN on the future of work, so we have to be part of that future, because this has the potential to impact the way we work more even than decentralization if we push it to the faraway consequences. Now, having said all this, these are the areas of decision-making that we're carrying forward. I have to say that the SMC, the SET, and myself were very mindful that many staff will be impacted by this decentralization process. Now, the most immediately impacted staff right away are the staff in the existing current regional bureaus and in the 6 regional structures that will undergo transformation in Dakar, in Nairobi, in Amman, in Pretoria, in Bangkok, and in Panama. This is where this already we have regional functions that will be modified and or regional centers that will be modified and adapted to the new structure. Now, all of it is in the broadcast, but just to recall, to highlight, in February, all the positions that may be impacted, all the people incumbent of the positions that may be impacted will receive what is called a notice of intent. This is an administrative requirement. The bureaus, meanwhile, will submit the core structures to the budget committee that will make decisions on which positions are discontinued and which ones are created. Posts, people impacted will receive at this point what is called a letter of notification. I'm looking at HR to be correct with the terminology, giving a 6 months notice, and at the same time, new posts will be advertised. I don't want to go too much into that, but two things I want to say about the advertisement of this post. We will conduct a vacancy management and recruitment process that is as flexible as possible, in the sense that we don't want to overburden bureaus where it is not necessary, and most importantly, that will take in due consideration, in priority, staff that would remain unplaced by the discontinuation of post. So, HR will be much more clear in specific communications about the details, but this is essentially the approach that we're taking. And of course, as we said already before, as was discussed, I think, a lot in previous fora led by the DHC, we will take many mitigation measures. Many have already taken place in Geneva, with the freezing of advertising and the filling of general service positions. On another front, I will certainly do all that I can, I and senior managers, to try and secure opportunities in other organizations, as was done in the past at the time of transformation, for those who wish to remain where they are, but there is no more position there. There will be an array of advice channels provided by human resources in terms of career support through webinars. I don't want to elaborate, you can imagine, but they have already built up quite an advisory capacity. And of course, and this is another question that came through the pigeonhole, we will develop voluntary separation packages, which we are in the process of designing, for those colleagues that would like to take that opportunity to retire from the organization. We know by experience, I wasn't there, but many of you were, that in previous exercises, such as when headquarters were split, some colleagues opted for retirement, and this type of packages will make that retirement easier, will support that wish, and of course, again, we will have advisory channels for that. The reason why we cannot give the details yet of that voluntary separation package is that it has to go through some mandatory consultations, including the JAC, and that means that we will only be ready in March, hopefully, with a fully designed voluntary separation program. But in principle, it will be open to all, in fact, because we want to open it to all, who have fixed, indefinite or fixed-term contracts and who have more than 5 years of service. Now, of course, and I come next to the conclusion, this transformation, which is very complex, there's many other aspects, of course, has a cost and has to be managed. On the cost, it's, we have tried to give a cost, because there's also another slide that say you haven't cost it. No, it's not true. We have tried to cost it. It's a bit difficult to cost it before you have the full picture of the design of the bureaus, the full picture of the non-core functions. This will take several months. So the cost goes by approximation, but our current estimates that takes into account the main pieces of transformation, moving the offices, investing in new infrastructure, the voluntary separation packages, and so on and so forth. All of this represents a cost with many variables, of course, but within a range that I believe the organization can afford without undue pressure on current operations. That's my sense. It will be very difficult to go to donors and say, please fund this transformation. They'll send the ball back to us and say, we give you unearmarked funding, you have to use that for this purpose. So we'll try to stay within that. I think it's possible. We may have to dilute or to lengthen some of the processes if the impact is too high, but I do not believe so. So I'm fairly confident that this is an affordable process. In terms of governance, of course, I mentioned already that the APR will be assisted by a special team. We will also constitute a team led by HR to help bureaus and impacted staff go through the procedure, the human resources administrative procedures that will be very complicated in the beginning. But the most important thing about governing the change is that up to now, of course everybody has participated, but this process has been led, coordinated, let's say, by the change team, and this is an opportunity for me to thank Daisy and her team for really having made a very big effort to coordinate this project. But with the implementation, the change team will continue to be there to assist, but the management, the leadership, the participation in change and transformation has to be mainstreamed. We're all part of it. In fact, perhaps the bureaus now in the immediate have the biggest role in the redesign of themselves. Very soon the division will also have to go through the same process. So really, this is an important phase in which everybody is involved. And one thing that I said in the beginning, transformation is not just regionalization. Today we focus on that because I know it's in the minds of everybody. But there's many other aspects. HR has been transforming for quite some time, for example. We've been focusing on results-based management and improving the way we measure the impact of our programs. We have changes, transformation led to the Global Compact on Refugees. We have a lot of work being done on data, also with the help of the World Bank. The list is very long. So there are many strands of transformation, and what I will do in the next few weeks is establish a light governance structure that ensures that all these strands are tied together, not contradictory, and work in sync, to the extent that this big machine is possible to be coordinated. So I'll communicate to you on that. Of course, I will also ensure that the executive management of the organization, the SET and the SMC, is fit for purpose for this new dimension in which we're going. There was a clear message from the SMC to the SET. Some of the SET decisions, my decisions, are not always clearly communicated. The process through which these decisions are made is not always clear. We will make an effort, as an example, to improve on that communication. And the SMC, because part of it now will be decentralized outside, will continue to meet weekly by video to exchange information. But my plan, at least for next year, is to have every 2 months a meeting in person of all the directors here, including the decentralized one, so that we can continue to talk about the change as it happens. So many shifts will happen, will occur, I can assure you. I said to the SMC, and before I conclude, I want to tell all of you that there is one key word underpinning all this. And this key word is particularly important when the aim is to delegate authority, to give more authority to others. And this key word is trust, I just want to leave this word with you so that you reflect on it. Because perhaps this is the word for us in 2019. Of course, trust, you will say trust is not enough. We can all commit to be trustworthy. No, trust is has to be coupled with very concrete measures, and that's what we will develop, greater accountability that we will have to apply more stringently. But trust is the word. It is particularly important at a time when sometimes this trust has been shattered, has been put in question. You have certainly read recently another broadcast of mine in which, sadly but necessarily, I shared with you the disciplinary measures that I have taken in a number of cases of misconduct, fraud, harassment, abuse, and so forth. This is something that UNHCR has been doing for a number of years, but we have become more detailed, without naming names, but more detailed in describing these cases, by way of examples to everybody, to show that accountability is important. So there is trust, but that trust goes with a responsibility that has to be carried out. So we have to give people the means to carry out that responsibility. But then, once this is done, that responsibility is with the decision makers. And everybody is a decision maker at one point in the course of his or her work. And I know that this topic of integrity, of carrying out our work in the most impeccable manner, even in very risky situations, is one of your highest priority. I'm happy it is. Because it means that we're all aware of the importance of integrity. This year, we could have done an even better fundraising results, but we got some hits because in some operations there were either allegations or proof of misconduct and fraud. That had an immediate hit. It's not for that reason that we should have integrity. We should have integrity per se. But an additional reason is that the lack of integrity causes a lack of trust on the part of donors. And that is, of course, very lethal. But back to the trust, I think trust is very, very important. In the end, it is an interpersonal issue that I would like all of you to reflect upon, as I said. And it means, and I say it once again, as I said many times, that we need to rethink our organizational culture. We need to set aside, also in light of this new structure, some of the unnecessary hierarchical mechanism that we have in place. This is why we have to intensify our effort to obtain inclusion and diversity in this organization and to uphold its core value. Let me close by saying I know that it's nice for the High Commissioner to share all these things for you, that he has prepared very well and he can share in a smooth manner. I know it's tough. And it is difficult. But I'd like to end by challenging you a little bit. Can we all make an effort, including me, can all of us make an effort to see change not as a threat, not as something that carries risk and danger also? It does, but not only that. Can we also see transformation as a big opportunity? Because I think in the end, this is the most important bit. And the biggest opportunity is that through this transformation, eventually, when we've carried it out, we will be even closer to the people that we work with and for. And it is not small feat, we may even become more efficient. If we fail this, we will continue to be a good organization, but we will be more exposed to the risks that I mentioned in the beginning. If we will succeed, we will certainly remain relevant. May I say, we will become even more relevant to many, but especially to the refugees, to the displaced, and to the stateless people that so much need and deserve it. Thank you very much.
You don't get to sit down, though. No? Okay. This comes to, or thank you very much, High Commissioner. This comes to the interactive part of our program. And this is where we will alternate, taking a few more, I think, pigeonhole, because those are, of course, our colleagues that are beaming in from operations primarily and don't have a voice here in the room with us. And we'll come to you as well on the floor, particularly if there have been inspirations from questions that were answered or part of the remarks to start this program. But there are a couple of big vote getters in terms of the pigeonhole. And one is on performance management. And in particular, I think there were 3 or 4 questions that were related to this, very similar. One thread in terms of whether or not those employees have a chance to tell the boss how he or she is doing. There's another thread of questioning in terms of what happens when a performance management system doesn't work, in terms of being able to measure a performance, an underperforming employee, and that person continues on, and an endless rebuttal system. So in terms of remarks, is this something, I have a feeling I know the answer to this, but is this something that you are open to examining in a new and fresh way as part of this transformation?
Definitely I would say yes, because it's very clear that this is all part of trust and accountability, right? We need to be able to measure better performance and to be able to intervene when performance is not good, or maybe to reward more when performance is good. And there's many ways, and of course HR continuously works on these tools, but it is very challenging. You know, I've worked more than 30 years in the UN, and I know that this is one of the most challenging aspects of human resources management. However, I personally think that what is called commonly 360 evaluation, meaning having a type of evaluation or a type of assessment of performance that involve the people that you supervise, the people that you work for, your peers, you've all done it many times, I'm sure, is a very important and interesting tool. There are some constraints. It's cumbersome to do it for everybody systematically. It's costly if you want to do it properly. But I think that in part it is already being used, if I'm not mistaken, as a development tool to help people improve their performance. It's not yet used as an accountability tool, but I think that we need to perhaps move more in that direction through pilots or otherwise. I am open to that. I think I have personally in my own career benefited from 360. I don't know if we can make it standard for everybody all the time, but I think that we can use at least elements of that. We can develop the idea of feedback from people supervised to help us make judgment on the performance of people and help them manage their own career in particular.
I think it might be interesting for the room and the broader community to know that we went through a bit of this even informally as we were preparing for last week's retreat within the senior executive team, and it continues to be a really helpful management tool both ways in terms of laterally and vertically, horizontally. The other issue is to get to this next question in terms of frustrations when underperformers. There has been efforts to put more individuals on rebuttal processes and boards to be able to move cases through more quickly so that we can address this as well. Can we go back, and you mentioned Uganda in your remarks, and this is perhaps the second highest vote getter. Some are familiar with what happened in Uganda, in particular with the attention we had at the end of the year by donors and others, and the audit findings, and others not so much. And in terms of how do you think it has impacted us as an organization, and what have we learned from it in other operations?
Actually, I did not mention Uganda in my opening remarks, not because Uganda is not on my mind. If Uganda hears or listens, please, you are on my mind all the time. And this is one of our biggest operations. We have, I think, about 1,000 people of our 15,000 in Uganda alone. I did not mention, not because I don't believe it's important, but because I also mentioned, instances of misconduct, fraud, negligence in a broad manner. I think that Uganda has become, unfortunately, a bit of a symbol, and we don't want this to be attached to Uganda per se, or to our colleagues that are doing every day such a brilliant work, including responding to these instances of fraud and misconduct, which regrettably happen. And why did they happen there? Also because it is a huge operation conducted under very difficult circumstances, and in a difficult environment. So I want to just say this to stand a little bit with our Uganda colleagues. Having said this, it was a very big set of problems that emerged through our own observations, and then subsequently, and this is what made the whole issue resurface again very recently, through an audit report that, like most audit reports, was made public. I have to say, like many of you said, that a lot of what the audit report published in August, I think, last year, we had already been working to address for several months. And that's why, in fact, on a number of audit recommendations, we have already been able to respond, because work had already been carried out. Not on all. On some of the more complex issues, we're still working. There is also one, or maybe there are two recommendations in the audit report that are quite important, and that say, at the time of this examination, of this report, which is 2016, there were, issues that could be construed as negligence or mismanagement, and the organization needs to dig more into that, needs to investigate, to determine where the accountabilities lie. If you've read the audit, this is what it says, and this is what we're doing. This investigation or investigations are not yet concluded. They will take several months. They're very complex. We don't do many of this type of accountability investigations, but I'm keen that they concluded, and once they're concluded, we'll be able to draw the necessary consequences of that. But it's important, and this is, again, I don't want to single out Uganda, because in fact we had problems also in other places, but in Uganda, because of the size and the visibility, this happened, and I think it's important that we look at it, because we learned a lot through the Uganda experience. We learned a lot, but for example, and that was discussed at the SMC last week, we need to become better in injecting into emergency responses and oversight capacity. Something that perhaps we did in the past, it has a little bit slipped. We need to restore that. This is just one example, but I could give you many examples. So I also want to take Uganda as a lessons learned exercise, which will allow us to strengthen our risk management capacity throughout the world. And a lot of it we're already doing. But the most important, and sorry if I elaborate, but this was a very big vote getter, so I think it deserves a comprehensive reply. I would like to say Uganda has also shown that, especially in high-risk situations, lot of money, fast-moving emergencies, maybe instances of insecurity, corruptions in other parts of the environment in which we are operating. In this situation, vigilance has to be redoubled. It's not just the risk management people. It's not just our colleagues on the ground. Of course, they have a primary responsibility. It's not just the bureaus helping them, but it's all of us, including myself, that have to redouble vigilance without becoming paranoid. Because as I keep telling my colleagues, if we become obsessed with this, of course, nobody will want to manage operations anymore. There is an element of risk that we have to accept and manage properly. So that boundary, that flexibility is a very difficult one that we need to keep in mind and manage in an adequate way.
All right, let's turn to the room for a moment. Any burning questions that colleagues here want to address? And we have other experts, I know, here in the room if we can't address them. Stunned into silence. Okay, we'll keep going to the pit. Yes, please.
Thank you. High Commissioner, in your address, you mentioned one of the focus of the transformation was about simplifying processes and business process re-engineering. And you talked about automation, artificial intelligence, and that even in the field, apparently there are pilots of this, okay? So for me, the one thing that comes to my mind is communication, because obviously this is already happening, but some of us are not aware. You did mention, I believe, that you would get the director of DFAM to sit on whatever structure who will lead this new, the area new technologies and, disruptive technologies, because in the Secretary General already has something going, on, new technologies for the UN. And for me, I'd like to see how we are sort of hooking up into this structure that already begins, that is already there. We are in a transformation, we're in change. How are we integrating these new technologies into the change? And there is this thing also linked to performance, because, as we automate and we transform and, we bring these new disruptive technologies into the way we do business, it will free time from people to get more creative, more innovative and everything. But then it links to reward, because you talked about performance, and in the outside world, when you talk about innovation, how they reward people who come out with these innovative ideas is, you know, they use IP, you know, intellectual property, and they get benefits from the ideas. Are we planning to introduce these things into the way we reward staff, you know, when they come out with these, you know, ideas? Voila.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Thank you. Actually, you almost gave the reply to your answer. So, but just to, you know, maybe I'll also ask Kelly to look at the innovation part. But I wanted to say. Yes, you're quite right. You know, in a way, when we discussed this last week with the directors, many made exactly the same observation as you. How come? We do already some of this automation project and we don't really know. So I have asked the director of DFAM, who is over there on the balcony, and I'm looking at him, to not only coordinate our simplification process, business simplification process, but also to communicate more widely what we are already doing. I was very, you know, I heard recently that, for example, I think it's, where is Rauf? It's in Kakuma, that we have applied some automation to the resettlement process. So as I said, it's not just the more obvious areas. And I think it is very important. And you're quite right that, of course, the UN itself, and I said it in my remarks, has embarked on this innovation through technology. We are very much part of that discussion. We're very much part in many ways, including leading together with the World Food Programme, one of the strands of reforms that looks exactly at that. How can UN agencies work more efficiently, pooling resources together? So there's an additional dimension in order to improve their performance and eventually reduce costs. So I think that we need to do that. Of course, you are right to say that automation can help people, you know, free up some of the time consumed in more mechanical tasks. It's also true, and I said it to the SMC, that for many people, those mechanical tasks are their job, especially in the field. So if we take this away, we have to be careful about the human impact of that. And of course, at the other end of the spectrum, automation is great, but the human dimension, I'm an old man, the human dimension has to remain there. So we need to balance those two. Maybe on innovation in general, I'll ask Kelly to make a few.
Yeah, just a quick comment, both on the Business Innovation Group, which coincidentally is having a workshop in our building right now as we speak. So there's really active interagency engagement on these issues, including some issues that are related to this in terms of the digital side of our operations. But the innovation piece too, and our colleagues I'm sure are interspersed in the group. Yes, I see Chris over there. It's not just technology that we're looking at. It's not just issues related to digital ID and so on. It's also the way that we work. So everything that the High Commissioner prefaced in his discussion is related to cultural, behavioral, how we look at the impact on our work, how do we use things like artificial intelligence to know whether or not people are going to move, what factors are at play, and so on. And the issue, too, is how do we accept that we're going to take risks and know that we're going to fail and have that be okay? And so in terms of us as an organization, this infuses some of the cultural changes that the High Commissioner mentioned towards the end of his remarks. But look at this as an opportunity and look to the Innovation Service and others that are looking at related issues as a way to get other ideas as to how to transform ourselves as agencies. I will, one more from the floor and we'll go back to Pigeonhole. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. High Commissioner, for all this information. One quick question I have, which maybe is a complicated question, and sometimes I've seen that sometimes keeps us from being as agile as we wish, and that's the resource and mobilization and the way country offices can receive money and are complicated OL and OL increases that may or may not be approved by budget committees, etc. And that often slows down a lot of the consequences of staffing and resources and everything else. And so while I haven't heard so much, I know that you're saying that this is something you're looking at, but it would be interesting to know some of the maybe innovative ideas that are going to be coming forward on how country offices can access resources when they need it more quickly and in maybe the level they need.
Thank you. That's actually a very good question. Kelly may have more to say, but it has different aspects, of course. There is one fundamental issue. Can resource mobilization be decentralized in an environment where we have relatively few donors and relatively scarce resources, and in an environment in which our own operations compete for resources? So that makes it rather challenging. So of all the things that we have examined with the SMC last week, this is where there was perhaps most discussion. Can we decentralize or not? I think that, to me, the right direction, which is what also came through these various proposals that I mentioned, is to test an element of decentralization, maybe some of it, and especially in areas where local opportunities may exist for country offices to raise money. You know, local pooled funds, some development funding, some embassy funding. It will be a smaller percentage, but that could give some space for resources to be raised immediately. Of course, then there is the whole issue, where do these resources go? Because we have a rather rigid structure with OL that needs to be filled, because otherwise the agency doesn't work, and then OP that is the more ideal target. And there you have another, if you want, complication, which is a positive one, that through the Global Compact on Refugees and the CRRF, we're now able, or we will be able, hopefully, to mobilize resources that will not go directly through UNHCR, but like those of the World Bank, that go bilaterally to governments or in other ways to help refugees and host communities. So I think that we thought in the SMC that the time has come for a reflection. Is in this evolving context, is it not the time to look again at our funding structure and, as a consequence, our resource mobilization strategy? I think our funding structure is quite sound, because we're able to portray the totality of needs, and then we can, you know, we ask offices, we give offices spending levels according to the projected income. But in this evolving context, there are new elements that need to be taken into consideration. Perhaps without revolutionizing the structure, we need to introduce some new elements to make it more adapted to absorb these new dimensions. This, however, this has to happen whether you decentralize or not, frankly speaking, although it is also an element of decentralization. So it's not time-bound to when the bureaus go out, but I think we need to take the advantage of this period of reflection on how we work to look at that as well. So sorry, it's a little bit of a long question because it's quite a complex issue. Maybe we will be able to decentralize some, to attribute to country offices some ability to raise funds. And in addition to that, I should have mentioned, also, I think it will be possible to give them more ability to reallocate funding, which is now also very complicated, between different areas, in full respect of the overall targets and considerations. So these immediate things, I think we will be able to do pretty soon. The overall structure and approach, I think, will require more discussion, including with our main stakeholders in this respect, which are donors, of course.
Maybe this is an opportunity to say two things. I just put up another pigeonhole question, which was related to the famous RAF. And when there would be an adjustment to this. The idea is that as the directors and their core teams move out in September, that this new RAF, adjusted RAF, would be in place at that point, and then another adjustment would be made as the finalization of the transformation happens then next year. And this is when we'll get to some of those what's working, what's not working. We have the tremendous advantage of having the newest member of the UNHCR team, Dominique Hyde, who is over here on the other side of the room, joining us from experience in UNICEF and WFP and other agencies that actually have a hybrid model, but she's also probably the first to admit that UNHCR is the envy of other agencies in the fact that we get a lot more money out earlier than other agencies in some contexts. So we have to balance these issues, certainly. Going back to the pigeonhole, there is a very active group of our team members in Turkey with a very specific question. Excuse me, I'm going to put it up here, I hope. With regard to salary surveys and scales, and I just had a quick confab with our DHR team, we're going to have to get back to our Turkey colleagues on this comparative review salary survey question because we're not familiar enough with the details, but we will become very quickly and get back to you. But that was the next highest vote getter. The next issue...
And there may be other situations.
Yeah, there, exactly. The next issue was another high vote getter. And I have to say there are also other comments in the pigeonhole that are exactly the opposite of this. With regard to the overall transformation, obviously the gist of the question is that this isn't a good idea. Not quite in those words, obviously. But if you look at some of the comments and some of the other questions, there are also comments that say some of the quieter members of our organization actually think it's a fabulous idea. So I know that there are obviously going to be elements on both spectrums, some wildly supportive, others not so wildly supportive. But what do you make of this in terms of, you've already addressed some of the answers to this in terms of the analysis that was done leading to your decisions, but you might want to address this particular one.
All right. This is a tough statement, which got 99 votes. I think that I have only two words that I don't agree with. One is vast, actually three, because vast majority. I don't think that the vast majority of staff members think this is a bad exercise, but I think, in fairness, that there are many, maybe a majority, that are quite apprehensive about the future. You know, and there are others that are supportive, etc. I think that, you know, this is the responsibility of the leadership. The leadership here is taking a decision, is taking a direction, based on certain consideration that this is, yes, there is a risk in this change, we're taking it. The other word I very much disagree with is, as you can expect, suicidal. Yeah, I would be really irresponsible if I thought that this would be the case. And I would like to send a message to those 99 people that I really don't think, based on my own personal experience in managing organization, in working in this organization, that this is suicidal. I would say that if we did not do this exercise, I don't think that we would commit suicide either. But certainly the risks, in my opinion, are higher than doing it. There is a certain, maybe instinctive evaluation there between risks of moving and of not moving. I think not moving in the present context that I tried very, very quickly to describe in my very initial remarks, not moving in, you know, confronted with that context is extremely dangerous. We are in a more dangerous world for the type of values and principles that underpin our work than in many years, I think. And that requires the type of adaptation that I think we are designing. And the rest of the statement is, I think, understandable. It says that there is no risk assessment, no evaluation of cost and benefits, no idea of what the structure will look like. Well, I hope that what we put in the broadcast and what I said today answers some of these questions, but they are legitimate because so far we were not able to share responses on those questions. Like I said, this is a process that goes, that moves along, and as you move along, more aspects will become more clear, and we'll be able to discuss them and share them. So have a little bit of patience, but I think that you know, we will be transparent and we will be even clearer on structures, although I think it's becoming more clear as we move along the calendar that I described. We will be more clear about how we will address some of the risks, and of course we will be clear on the cost because we will have to incur expenditure. I saw before you changed slide that in spite of my, I was hoping, convincing argument, it went to 100 votes. We'll keep those 100 people in mind because that opinion is very important. Please, you know, that's not really entirely a joke. I am very mindful that there are people that are very worried, and we will address all concerns to the extent that we can.
So you'll see that I put up another slide because obviously we've talked about this in some of the open forum, but for those that are joining this conversation for the first time, what are other agencies doing and how is it guiding what we may do as an organization. You've had some conversations, I know, with the new Director General of IOM in terms of his plans. I think it's a centralized function primarily still in terms of the policy and coherence, which is very similar to what we would be doing here, with still a very strong regional dynamic. Same thing with WFP, with UNICEF, and some of our other closest sister agencies. But do you want to address a little bit your discussions with other agency heads in terms of the thinking?
Yeah, I don't think that IOM is centralizing. I don't think so. I think this is not entirely correct. I think IOM, of course, has a very different structure from UNHCR. Is an organization whose resources, 97% of whose resources are project-based. So they depend enormously on local projects. They, much less than us, have core resources that they can handle. So they are now facing somehow the opposite need. They have to bring back something to the center in order to become more flexible, especially as they become more and more the UN migration organization. You can't make a complete parallel with UNHCR, but certainly there are some similarities there. So I think that that's what they're trying to do. But if you look at the organizations, and the Change Daisy and the Change team have looked into that quite a bit, the trend is certainly not towards pulling back to the center. The trend is towards well-thought and well-safeguarded decentralization. Some have already gone ahead years ago. Somehow we can take advantage of all the lessons that others have learned and of our own attempts to decentralize that were not always very successful, and do it better this time.
We're coming to the close of this, but I want to get to a couple more questions on Pigeonhole. Before I do that, are there any other burning questions here in Geneva? Okay. There are two questions, High Commissioner, in terms of leadership, and I'll bring it up now in terms of your senior management committee and representation. And there are other related issues on recruitment, new generation, and so on. And obviously you had a very public message, which you mentioned, in terms of your own choices. Do you want to address this issue?
I don't know about the same old guards. I look at Clementine. She's a new director, and congratulations. And of course, you know, we had to, let me make a few remarks about this, because I understand this observation. We need to always balance, when you make senior appointments, I need to always balance two things: experience with new blood and ideas, right? This is how you manage the senior management of an organization. If everybody's new, you lose out on institutional memory, for example. But if there is only institutional memory, you do have the same old guard as. So I think that, frankly, if I look at the directors, of the 7 directors of the regional bureau, of the future regional bureaus, I actually appointed 4, 3 of whom were representatives in important countries. And I think that that's very important, that there is a continuity. Look at Indrika, look at Pascal, look at Clementine, Raouf himself, actually more. So I like that continuity from field management into regional direction. And I think I'm trying to push in that direction as much as I can. But, and I go broader than the 7 directors. Kelly mentioned Dominique, who's just joined us. I have also appointed, not so long ago, Hans as Director of Finance. I have appointed Kathy as Director of Human Resources. They are young, dynamic colleagues that come from other parts of the United Nations or the humanitarian system. I'm being very transparent. I'm trying, in designing the senior management of the future, of the next few years at least, to be as diverse as possible. And diversity is not just in who people are, I mean on their origin or professional characteristics or career, but also geographical, gender diversity. So, you know, that's an area where I have considerable space to make decisions. So I'm taking advantage of that space to try to make, to obtain a dynamic, diverse, but also experienced team of senior leaders. Because the continuity is also important, especially at a time when we're asking bureaus to go into a completely new, different environment. You know, sometimes you require, actually always you will require quite a lot of experience there. But you know my view. I have expressed it recently in a response that I provided to a letter from the Staff Council. I believe very much in new energy, young colleagues, and I will continue to try to open up space for them. It's not easy in an organization which, like everything else in this world, is aging, where retirement age is moving to higher figures, and where renewal becomes slower and takes more time. It's not easy. We need to balance all this consideration, but renewal, dynamism, new ideas are very much in my mind. Thank you.
And this is a segue to perhaps our last question for you. And this is a pretty big vote getter on culture change. The question is, in one sentence, how would you describe our current culture? And what is the culture you aspire us to have?
Oh, wow, in one sentence is difficult, but that's the most difficult challenge. I think that we still have a healthy culture of service to the people. That is still there. I think that unfortunately in this culture has crept in some staleness, is that the word, due to the cumbersome systems. Some of these cumbersome systems are justified by the many demands that we have in terms of accountability. Some are a little bit by inertia. So that's why this decentralization is also about simplifying processes, very much so. That was the origin of the whole exercise. So that's the culture I aspire to have. It's a culture where service, where being empathy with the people that we work with is there, is strong, is uppermost in our mind, and it is combined with both a sense of adventure, but also a sense of responsibility. And all of this, as I said, requires trust. Trust for each other. You have to trust me and I have to trust you, and it goes at every level. And who is accountable for the change? Well, I certainly take responsibility for having decided to move the organization in this direction. I'm comforted because I feel that the senior management supports me in this exercise with a lot of good advice, sometimes strong advice as well. But in the end, each one of us, and I speak to everybody in the organization, is responsible and accountable for the changes that it will bring to the work that we do for refugees.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That is all the time we have. Thank you, colleagues, for tuning in. As was broadcast earlier, February 13th, for those questions we did not get to, particularly the more detailed ones related to the transformation, we'll also try this attempt of trying to have an active engagement in real time, but we'll also use pigeonholes. So keep your ideas coming. Thank you very much.